So, why am I doing another video when I said at the end of the last one I'm never doing this again? No one knows. Get it? Because it's a video about Noah. Maybe if I say it slower it'll be funnier. Ultraman has a long and really wacky history, filled with stuff that evokes just about every response under the sun. From adrenaline to horror and grief to joy and laughter to every possible species of what? The best shows, incidentally, do all these things in rapid succession. But one of the aspects that to me evokes the greatest sense of wonder and mystery, the one that feels most like Ultraman's attempt to speak to something truly mystical, is Ultraman Noah. There's a lot of ways I could approach a topic as broad as Noah. While I use religious allegory here, I've seen people call Noah Ultra God before, but I think that that's not correct. I'd actually say he's more like the guardian angel of all light-based life forms like Ultras and Andromedans and Absolutines, but that's neither here nor there. That's not really what this video is about. That's not what this is. Mostly because this is already much longer than anyone would reasonably want to watch. So this video is going to be a journey from simple to specific. We're going to start talking about general appearances that Noah and Nexus have had over the history of Ultraman. We're going to talk a little more specifically about Nexus's show overall to get an idea of who or what he is as an entity and as a concept, and what he's supposed to mean. And lastly, we're going to do an in-depth deep dive play-by-play of his most recent appearance, which is in UGF3, The Destined Crossroad. Ultraman Noah was introduced in 2005, though he's retroactively appeared earlier than that. His power level is approximately relative to Ultras, as Ultras are to humans, which is a big difference. That said, Noah is not all-powerful, and he's been beaten before, repeatedly, and when this happens he reverts into a smaller avatar form, like an Ultra reverting to a human hoster form to recover their power. And that avatar is what we know as Nexus. We get two mainstream appearances for Nexus, one being his show and the other being his most recent appearance in UGF3. We also see Nexus appear in other places. I'm going to talk about the smaller stuff first, just so I can incorporate those themes into the larger overarching themes we're going to see developing as we get through the bigger stuff. Part 1, a foundation to build off of. I actually bought a microphone for this, but the audio is worse than my phone, so I'm not using it. Right, where does he appear? So in Ultraman Towards the Future, we see a cave painting of an Ultraman and a storm spirit together. The Ultra was retconned by word of author to be Noah. Noah appears in two main points in the Revenge of Belial movie. Firstly, we see an ancient crumpled statue of him that the team encounters while searching for the Shield of Baraji. Noah also appears at the end of that movie when Zero has a near-death experience. Noah gives him the power to come back to life, but also gives him the Shield of Baraji in the form of the Armored Aegis, which gives Zero incredible firepower and allows him to travel across dimensions with little to no effort. We hear mention of Baraji even earlier than that in the very first season of Ultraman. It's one of the first episodes that we see that there's a Stone of Baraji, where we see a special statue that may or may not be Noah, we're not entirely sure. The Ginga S movie states that Noah fought a Telgar and was so drained by it that he undigivolved into his Nexus form to recover. Nexus had an appearance in an Ultraman X episode and also appeared briefly in his movie. Also, there was a Nexus movie, Ultraman the Next. I have not seen it, and the article on the Ultraman wiki is either incomplete or Ultraman never actually appears in the movie. So I ain't talking about that. I'm pretty sure it also involves Noah losing a fight and undigivolving. So what do we learn from these glimpses? We see how ancient Noah is and that he has ties to many planets and peoples across time and space. It ties Noah to an ancient power called Baraji, which even within Ultra lore is really obscure. We know almost nothing about it. So a couple of other side things that I missed. Not Noah, but Nexus on his own without a host in stage shows and stuff like that is shown to be a baby, essentially. He has the mental capacities of a toddler. He is sweet, but he doesn't really seem to have any intellect behind him. Head empty, no thoughts. Oftentimes then he's shown together with Ultraman King, who's kind of seems to be in a babysitter position. That's probably its own can of worms. Oh, and speaking of King, then there's also the obvious comparisons to be made between Noah and King. Do they draw their power from the same source? Are they comparable in terms of power level? What are they? What makes them different? What makes them similar? That's also beyond the scope of this. It's already going to be over half an hour long. I can't do that. My personal interpretation is that Noah is sort of the guardian embodying angel of hope, like the virtue of hope incarnate, whereas King is more like Buddha in that he has fully realized his full self, in the same sense that Ken's new form as Father of Ultra is the truest expression of himself, except that King has refined that over the course of 300,000 years into the most perfect version of himself that he can make himself into. That is different from Noah in that while King has refined himself into the best that he can be, Noah simply is what he is. He cannot change in that he cannot become more or less what he already is. But becoming Nexus and taking on a host allows him to show different attributes to his pre-existing self. With that out of the way, let's get into Nexus's central appearance, his titular show. Part 2, the word Nexus means bond. This is me getting ready to Chekhov's gun the daylights out of you. The show Ultraman Nexus started airing in 2004. It was actually the first full Ultra show I watched since being like a little kid watching the 1966 episodes. He wouldn't be the first Ultra to come to mind if you asked me who my favorite Ultra was, but every time he's on screen I feel safe, I guess is the best word. Nexus exists in sort of a weird bubble because it doesn't feel like any other Ultra show. This show tends to have a thesis statement, like how Decker keeps coming back to the themes of doing your best isn't enough if you're not prudent about it, or how Ace is about fighting for love and understanding in the face of despair, or how Dinah's about if you say show fine play, the writers will immediately strike you down for your hubris. Nexus's thesis in the form of a question is, what would Ultraman look like in a world without hope? Ultra 7X also does this, by the way. If you liked Nexus, you should watch Ultra 7X. It's very funny. If you want to watch something where the director's constantly saying, I watched The Matrix 2, you guys, you'll have fun with this. And even other individual episodes do this. Like in 7, I think Ace and Leo do it too. But Nexus is just presented in a different way. There's more overarching mystery elements than we generally see in Ultra shows. I'm not an Ultra historian, there's loads of people who do that much better than I do, and I'll link to some of those below. But right now the most important citation I have is this one.
My name is Sunglass Spree. A lot of you guys probably know me better as Sarah Last. Most weeks I've been putting out recap articles on Ultraman Decker, thinking about the characters and where the plot's going. I want to kind of get readers and other people excited and interested in the whole breadth of that franchise, so that way they understand where to go to find that stuff and why it's worth checking out on their own.
Sarah's been writing articles for Ultraman since before I even entered the fandom, including a series of essays on Nexus that I'll link in the description because they're very worthwhile, they're good. She also has a history of talking about Ultraman's use of symbolism, which Nexus is chock full of. What makes it Nexus, would you say?
It's the sense of the unknown that the show starts with and kind of continues throughout it, because going back to the first Ultraman series, nobody knew what Ultraman was, but there was an understanding from the start, like as soon as Ultraman showed up, he's a good guy, he's here to help, we can trust that he's going to help out. We can't rely on him totally, but there's always a sense there between the defense teams and Ultraman that both of them want the same thing. Both of them want to protect the Earth, both of them want to stop kaiju. And Nexus does not start with that.
I'm gonna be deliberately vague with this portion because it's a good show and more than worth experiencing for yourself. And the Blu-rays are now available so you can watch it legally, which is wild. At the beginning of most Ultra shows, then we have a sort of set formula. Something will happen to them in the line of duty while they're protecting someone, while they're saving a dog, while they're trying to bite a kaiju. Taro's really funny. Over the course of the show, we learn that Nexus has had multiple hosts, and within the show we see a couple of these people and how their bonds with Nexus affects them and their worldview. I bring this up because we see a common thread through all of these hosts. They're all broken.
Nexus is kind of unique in the Ultraman series in that Nexus has multiple hosts. There's a couple within the show itself. I know that there was planned for another one before the show got canceled early, and Nexus has shown up in other shows. Ultraman X Nexus shows up where one of the characters uses the power of Nexus, and so a lot of times Nexus is portrayed as a power.
They're all clearly such imperfect people, and in different ways. We see one who's clearly got something wrong with their head, another who has taken so much physical punishment we're legitimately scared for their life. Even a host who, at least from what we've seen of them, seems not to have any hope or warmth inside of them. In fact, their only common element seems to be that they were Nexus's host.
Throughout the Nexus show, a lot of the focus is on how the characters choose to use that power, why it comes to them in the first place, how they grow to accept it and accept their role as Ultraman, and how ultimately they become a better person by taking on that responsibility and taking on that power and using it to help others. And that's really what defines Nexus. That concept of bonds, of relationships, developing over time to make people better versions of themselves is something very, very integral to Ultraman as a whole. But Nexus plays it out in a specific way because Nexus connects.
Which makes Nexus feel, again, different from most Ultras. It sounds like he doesn't need his hosts to start out with heroic hearts or be in good places emotionally or physically. Nexus doesn't really feel like he needs that. He just needs them to try, and that's enough. He bridges their lack after that. He doesn't fix them, but he gives them the power to help. So why is Nexus like that? Honestly, Nexus is the big show I'd recommend for people who look down on Ultraman as a children's show. Because Nexus, while kids absolutely could watch it, They are not the target audience for this, oh boy.
When Nexus first appears in the show, everybody sort of treats Nexus the same way as they do the kaijus, they do the space beasts. Of this is something big and unknown and scary, and we need to protect ourselves against it. There's even an episode where they order the defense team to actually fight against Nexus because they don't know whether Nexus is going to help them or not.
It deals with incredibly serious topics like deception, political machinations, jadedness, a lack of hope in a fallen world. This is every Ultraman show, actually.
Nexus kind of had the reputation of being like the dark, mature, edgy one. And so I was expecting like something dark and pressing, and there are some definitely really, really dark moments in the show. It's not so much the case anymore, but it seems like a lot of the fandom at the time was only focusing on the dark aspects of it. Things like, oh, well, the characters don't trust each other, there's conspiracies going on, and was a little bit disappointed that people only focused on like the first half of it where things are really at their darkest. And that's not the whole story.
Nexus is about jadedness, and I think it's telling that we consider that more realistic.
By the end of the series, it's one of the best ways of depicting those virtues of hope and compassion that I've seen in the franchise. And you have to go through those dark moments to get there, but the payoffs are a lot more effective because of those dark moments.
But it's still about hope and what hope means in an environment like that. Super has been very careful to keep that core in mind no matter what medium we're seeing Noah or Nexus through. From the grittiness of Nexus in the next to his brief appearance in X, to glorified fan service showing a surprisingly nuanced take on the nature of power and hope. Let's talk UGF3. Part 3, Tartarus' mission to kill the closest thing to God he can find. Why are you like this? I mean, actually. Ultra Galaxy Fight 3 is a glorious hodgepodge of about 6 different storylines in a trenchcoat pretending to be one. In case you think I'm exaggerating, Grigio, the new Gen Ultras, Zero, Regulos, Reboot, and Titan, and Astra? I think that's the main 6. But I talk more about that elsewhere. Here I just want to focus on the storyline that takes place between episodes 4 and 6. If you're watching it in the form of a movie, it's right in the middle. I'm gonna go through the plot beats to make sure everyone's on the same page, and we're gonna talk about what it means. This story starts with Tartarus and the Kingdom looking at planet Babel, the planet where Noah is said to appear. Not to immediately derail this, where is this legend coming from? Who's out there doxing Noah? Legitimately, I could get very sidetracked on this, I'm sorry, but they never tell us. I know it's a narrative device to get everyone in the same room, but Mr. Sakamoto, please, I need this to make sense for me. So Tartarus decides that the best way to solidify his claim on the Landolite is to kill... sorry, he's so stupid. Tartarus sends one person to go kill Noah, which is easily either the cockiest or stupidest thing he's ever done. But also that's a lot of faith in Teton, my guy. But it totally makes sense with what we've seen so far. At this point in the story, the Absolutians are at the height of their power and their hubris. They fully believe that they have the Ultras over a barrel now that they have their princess. As far as Tartarus is concerned, the Absolutians have won already. He's just covering his bases, making sure nothing can happen at last minute to stop him. He's killing their Deus Ex Machina. Also, Tartarus refers to it this way.
It may be just a rumor, but any potential threat must be eliminated.
Where is the rumor coming from? I don't know how deliberate this is, but I think that it's interesting. It's linguistically unclear from his sentence whether he's talking about the rumor itself that Noah will show up, or if Noah exists at all. So Titan arrives on the planet, and before anything happens, we get this moment of quiet. Titan looks around at this barren, dead planet, the ruins of Babel, and he asks himself, will a legendary being appear here? It's not a stretch to say that there's an implicit question here. Why would a legendary entity like Noah come to a place like this? We've never seen Planet Babel before this. Babel was created for UGF3 for this sequence, which means they had total control over what they wanted to say with it. And the naming choice feels too deliberate to be arbitrary, but the imagery it chooses to evoke with that name is interesting. Babel refers to the legend of the Tower of Babel, which is a biblical story that's so short it easily fits into a single screenshot. It's about humanity trying to build a tower high enough to reach God's level, the implication being that they'd then be like God. As punishment, God invented accelerated linguistic evolution, splitting their languages into many so that humanity could no longer communicate enough to finish work on the tower. The legend ends with humanity scattering, leaving a half-built tower as a tribute to their arrogance. But that has nothing to do with this, right? I'm sure that has nothing to do with how Tartarus is flying at his highest and most ambitious here, his hubris so great that he decides he can destroy the closest thing to God he can find. Look on my works, ye mighty, in despair. So with that mythical biblical context in mind, the planet itself seems to lean into that imagery. It looks dead, with half-built structures and ancient ruins, no visible signs of life, and a legendary entity of incredible power at the center of it. Which circles back again to the obvious question. Why would Noah be here? Why would an absurdly powerful, unknowable, almost eldritch entity come to a place we viewers would associate with division and God punishing people for hubris, much like Tsuburaya continues to punish me for mine? No time for answers, time for Mr. Sakamoto does another fight! So the Ultra Force, also known as the USA Gang, shows up, and they fight Titan, and it's fun, and we're getting that banter, and Reboot shows up, and they fight, and Titan's doing fine against 4 absurdly powerful and competent Ultras with great teamwork. And then...
Is that Noah? No, it's not Noah. You're Nexus.
What? Hang on a second. This raises so many questions. What do you mean that's not Noah? What do they think Nexus is? Why does Titan think he can 1v1 Noah? What is Nexus? What am I? Am I only famous because I'm a joke? Am I an artist trying to draw people towards the beautiful, but shackled always by my own jokes and my own hubris? Actually, I'm gonna back up a little bit and articulate something else that's been going on while we're on the subject of what is Nexus. So the Ultra Force is there explicitly because Zafi figured out the Absolutians would come after Noah, right? Reboot comes because Sora tells him they've picked up an Absolutian signature on Babel, and Reboot deduces that they're after Noah. So he comes there to protect Noah. What fascinates me about this is the Ultra's belief that Noah needs protecting by them. Huh. Anyway, props to Titan for looking at that and going,
"Yep, I can kill you."
So Titan immediately goes for the kill, and he can't get a hit in, but Nexus gets in 3 shots. One Titan blocks, the second gets through his guard and knocks him back, and a third bigger hit stuns him long enough for Nexus to do a more involved move, which is shifting into Junis Red and activating the meta field. Oh shoot, I haven't talked about what the meta field is. The meta field is a special ability we only ever see Nexus use. Essentially, it shifts him and his opponent into a pocket dimension where they can go all out against each other without risking any further damage to the real world. The Ultra Force manages to escape the field, but Reboot and Titan are trapped inside with Nexus.
Oh no.
That field is draining their energy. It's presumably going to kill them both if they can't get out in time. Sora, meanwhile, has been doing hot girl man in the chair things, and the only person with her as she watches Reboot suddenly blip out of existence is the war goddess from Orb Origin. And here's when we get our next bit of confusion over what Nexus is, because the war goddess tells Sora this.
If the power of Noah was exposed to evil and went out of control, it could be very dangerous.
No! Why do the Ultras agree with her? Sora's a baby, being told stuff by her superior. I cannot fault her for listening. But Reboot? Best boy Reboot believing that Noah is raw power that could be corrupted and used for evil? Is he right?
Everybody's reaction to it, I think, was interesting too, because everybody immediately assumed the worst. Like, oh crap,
I was gonna
we're
ask
going to
about
have
your
to fight.
thoughts on that.
I think to the Ultras, Noah is sort of a mystery still. That they've encountered its power in the past and on certain planets, but they're not really sure about what it is or what Noah and Nexus do on other planets. And so I think they just see that source of power and then, well, I want to say anthropomorphize it, but they're Ultras, so...
This is actually something I've heard people complain about before, and something I felt was really off about when I first saw this scene. It's that Noah/Nexus acts off in this appearance. He's aggressive, attacking people, acting exactly against what I've been describing him as for the past however long it's been. It's super clear that the Ultras have been right about Noah, that Nexus is just a raw power that can be used for good or evil. Not good in itself, but a two-edged sword that you hope swings toward your opponent instead of you. If Noah is raw power, then Nexus becomes a seek and destroy drone. Unthinking, unfeeling, uncaring. And that makes us uncomfortable. It makes us feel small and futile. It's the Lovecraftian fear of the unknowable to which we mean nothing. It's the insignificance of self compared with the impersonal eternal, an eternal so far beyond us that it neither knows us nor cares. Which, for an Ultra story, is really weird. Ultra lives on the concept of hope and love and the power of friendship. It's a weird tonal thing. In fact, I think that's how we're supposed to feel at this point in the story. We're supposed to feel like this is off. That there must be more than that. And Nexus just sort of as raw power and something that didn't have reason and didn't have compassion.
Yeah, so my first thought was, that isn't right. And honestly, the fact that it contradicted what I expected the power of Nexus or Noah to do was sort of my cue that, oh, I think there's something else going on here.
Part 4, time to check off that gun from earlier. The red and the blue instantly is for Junus and Junus Blue. This was supposed to be black and silver, but then I didn't do that. I'm not good at makeup. So we come to our fight inside of the metafield, and a few key things happen here, and we're going to break those down. Absolute Teton attacks and is immediately countered and beaten back, and Reboot has to physically drag him away so he doesn't die, and we get this exchange.
What do you propose?
Until we escape, shouldn't we work together?
What?
Until my friends find us a way out. We work together to buy time.
Now, Teton is being asked for 2 big leaps of faith here. The first is that he's asked to believe that Reboot himself is trustworthy. I'm not saying he thinks Reboot would stab him in the back, necessarily. I mean, we've seen his relationship with the other Absolutians. It's constantly aggressive and violent. While he's heard of the other Ultras and Reboot specifically, this is his first real encounter with camaraderie as a concept. Which makes his earlier comment about the Ultra Force really interesting, actually. Remember about that banter? What is it he said to them?
Such flawless teamwork. You're quite powerful.
He complimented their teamwork. And of course he would. Look at the teamwork he's seen from his own side, seeing a group of 3 Ultras who trust each other implicitly and are friends with each other. Of course he'd be surprised that they work that well together. He's never seen teamwork. So one is trusting Reboot. The second big ask is trusting Reboot's faith. Teton has to believe in Reboot's faith in his friends and teammates, but also in his ideals. Reboot believes in those friends who share those ideals of empathy and compassion and hope. He has bonds that transcend reason. Teton is being asked to believe that total strangers would care enough to act selflessly, with possible danger to themselves, to save him, with no guarantee that they'd actually make it in time. All he can do now is believe that the people on the other side will try and do his best to support them where he is now. Does that sound absolutine to you? It shouldn't. It's surrendering control means admitting you can't do it alone. But it's not like he has much choice. So Teton agrees, and I think he must have expected to go out there and fight, but Reboot did something that seems superficially weird. But on rewatch, I think it's the most Reboot thing he could have done. He introduces himself.
Thank you. Once again, I'm Ultraman Reboot.
Teton already knows his name. He's heard about Reboot, presumably from the Absolutians. He's got a preconceived idea of who this Ultra is and how he relates to Teton. A rival, some vague notion that's easy to put into a clean box and swing a sword at. Reboot chooses to introduce himself, which means it's now not hearsay or a preconceived concept. Reboot chooses to extend a piece of himself to Teton on his own terms. Not a title, not like we hear Reboot use with people he fights.
Galaxy Rescue Force, Ultraman Reboot. I'm here to help the Ultra Force.
But like how you'd introduce yourself to a new acquaintance.
Thank you. Once again, I'm Ultraman Reboot.
Now it's personal. Now, however tenuous, it's a bond. And Teton realizes he's being asked to do likewise. And he does it. Mad lad, he does it. So they go forward and charge the impossible force as one, and for this moment, their wills are aligned. I'm gonna go to get a drink. Goodbye. I have 2 Ultraman mugs because I broke this one, so I use it for paint water. And now I'm putting them right next to each other, so I'll definitely take a slurp of this. This is, it's very dirty right now. So they fight alongside each other, and eventually Reboot receives a telepathic transmission from Sora. The fact that this is scratchy and distorted, it implies things about how ultra telepathy works. It seems to have radio transmission qualities to it, which makes sense given that they're light-based organisms, and what was I talking about? But the important thing is, while Reboot's taking that call, he's not helping Teton at all. Teton is holding off Nexus by himself, but Teton never has a moment of a little help here, and he never undermines Reboot while he's talking to Sora. He listens, he buys Reboot time, and while he's physically beaten back and caught by Reboot, he shakes off his injuries and...
Are you okay?
He laughs. He has a moment of triumph as he realizes that Reboot's crazy, stupid faith paid off, and all he can do is laugh and act on that faith. Sora tells them that attacking the glowing weak spot is how you beat Nexus in co-op mode, and so they do, and then this happens.
Nexus?
Oh, this is the linchpin of this story. This recontextualizes everything we just saw. Instantly, I don't know a ton of Japanese, but I know enough that a literal translation of this line is, "You did this for our sake, or for our benefit." So at that last crucial moment, Reboot realizes the big reveal, the truth of the situation that moments before he thought he'd understood. But being Reboot, he's cultivated an openness in himself such that with this new information challenging that thought, he abandons his preconceptions and grafts himself onto the truth being revealed to him. Nexus wasn't out of control or uncaring. He never was. Ultras learn things by getting beaten up. This is true, this is canon, we see it in literally every Ultra show ever. We've seen Ultras acquire new forms that way, learn vital lessons, grow as people, and their literal formal training is, you have a lesson and I'm here to punch and kick you till you figure out what it is. We really see this in the same special, in the same episode. That's what's crazy about this. While this is happening concurrently, Zero's getting his 17th special form and gets it by being beaten up by his dad, his mentor, and the hottest guy on U40. Strongest guy on U40. Meanwhile, Noah saw two people who needed to form a bond and learn a lesson about his power, and he appeared to become the joining point for those people to connect. He became their nexus. Circling back to that point on the significance of the planet, we can see now why it's called Babel. Babel's famous for being a place where a divine force interceded and caused division, splitting people apart on the foundation of many nations. And in the ruins of that place of division, now two people are being brought together in what might be the foundation of a new unity and force for peace. Two people of different worlds are united in a brotherhood, a bond of trust and shared mission. It's the Old Testament division and the New Testament reunion. Haven't drunk the paint water yet. The very last appearance that Noah has in UGF3, which is, at the time of recording, the last appearance we see of him at all, is in a flashback. After Reboot and Teton escape the metafield, the first thing they see is Tartarus fighting the Ultra Force. Reboot doesn't abandon Teton to go help his friends or even start fighting Teton again. He turns to the Absolutian assassin and says this.
We can work together. Noah taught us that.
Teton, of course, refuses, reverting back to his earlier closed-off self. But I'm curious, would he have refused so quickly if Tartarus hadn't been there?
The whole conflict between the Absolutians and the Ultras is really, the Absolutians are like, we have to have this power. There's no other way, and we're going to destroy anybody else in our path, including the Ultras. And this is the first hint that we get that they can both work together. So both of them can receive that light, which means that both of them can also form that connection in a very literal way, because Noah can reach out to both of them.
I'm inclined to think it wouldn't change much, but I don't think it's a coincidence that right after Teton speaks of their alliance, it cuts to Tartarus watching them like this. And what's the first thing Tartarus says?
Reboot. You and your meddling.
Tartarus, I think, feels like he has all of these pieces in place. He's expecting, I think, a source of power, and it kind of makes sense why he would make that mistake, because as I mentioned, based off of Reboot's reaction to Noah and Nexus, I think that they didn't realize what they were getting into either. And so it makes sense that if the Absolutians are just looking at things based off of like the Ultra's perspective and what they think is important and how they view the rest of the universe, he doesn't recognize what is important about that either, which is why he only sends one person.
Also, this is very funny and I want to roast the man. So, from Tartarus' point of view, he just cockily sent his top Absolutian assassin to go kill a being of legendary power. Realizing he was taking too long, showed up to find no Teton, but a handful of scrappy Ultras who like speaking English. He fights them with no idea of what's going on, and eventually sees Teton blink back into existence, with Reboot next to him, telling Teton, the godlike entity you were just sent to kill taught us a valuable lesson about the power of friendship. That is objectively very funny. But there's something else here that I actually overlooked the first time I said bye.
Why? You surely heard Noah too.
That line. realized that Noah wanted them to work together as equals. He intuitively realizes that for them to work together, it means Noah must have spoken to Teton also. He never considers himself to be superior to Teton, or thinks that Noah wouldn't speak to Teton because he's different or not a good guy. He has faith that Noah would be fair and treat Teton with equal dignity. And he's right. At its core, Nexus, both as a show and as a character, is about the same things all Ultra is about. It just looks through a lens that's a different color than we usually get. And Teton, who's only ever seen competition and battles for superiority, immediately withdraws into the world he's used to. He tries to hide behind his own framework, tries to ignore the massive hole that rebooted Noah just punched in it. I'm recording more because I didn't record a proper outro. Oopsie doopsie. Teton has a direct encounter with a merciful, compassionate higher power that wants to draw him into communion with itself and with the people around him. And it uses Reboot as a tool of the light, as an ambassador of light, which he calls himself previously.
That's Ultraman, the ambassador of light!
To reach out to him, to connect with him. And that kind of communion is something he probably thought wasn't for people like him, not for an absolutian, not for an assassin who's hurt other people, someone who's had the experiences that he's had. But hope reaches out to him and holds him and offers itself to him. And when he fights Reboot again later at the end of UGF3, we see he's not only fighting Reboot, he's fighting against that impulse to join him. He's fighting against himself, wanting that light, wanting that connection, wanting that bond. We see the way that he acts and the way that he looks, and we just see he's lost. What do you do after an encounter like that? What do you do after seeing that connection, that bond, after feeling that way? One last thought I'm going to leave you with. In character design terms, then Teton is very absolutian, but he's also got something that no other absolutian has. Teton, whenever we see him, is wearing a mask. And anything that looks vaguely like an Ultra, the Andro Melos gang, Ultraman Melos, Hunter Knight Tsurugi, or any other Ultra who's worn armor, anything that's been over their face has been a mask. Tartarus and Diablo both have their faces fully exposed. They've got a lot of gaudy gold stuff, but you can see their faces, you can see their eyes and their mouths at all times. Teton, you can only see his eyes sometimes, which means that he's hiding himself. In terms of just character design, it means that he's holding himself back, he's hiding himself. Which makes me wonder, when we see him with Reboot again, if we end up seeing more of his arc, if we end up seeing where he ends up going, will Teton feel safe enough to show who he really is? Watch Nexus. No outro written down for this, so let's just talk, I guess. How are you doing? I don't actually care. No, I can't say that.